This one's going to be easy. This one's going to be quick. PragerU released a tweet. And whenever PragerU releases something, there's always a level of trepidation. How thinly veiled is this going to be? How stupid is it going to be? Who is it going to be appealing to? Well, with this particular one, it's a little transparent. PragerU says, in a welfare state, self-reliance is not a virtue. People feel entitled to education, healthcare, retirement, vacation, paid leave, and free benefits. Eventually, entitlements become rights. Socialism produces a far more selfish society than a free market economy. So, maybe let's go into this. There's so little said here, but so much to break down. And let's go from top to bottom. Why would people feel entitled to education? There's two frames we can look at this through. There's actually multiple frames we can look at this through. One of them is, what do you consider a human right? And according to the UN, education is actually a human right. But let's look at it through some non-fallacious lenses for a second. Let's look at it through what PragerU's intent is. Now, PragerU bills themselves as an educational instrument. They are a charity organization that makes videos for free on the internet for you to watch and enjoy, and you get all kinds of conservative information from their videos. It's all from a conservative bent. It's all incredibly biased. Let's talk about a world where people don't have access to education. And their options are going to be independent sources that are free to them, like PragerU. Now, what happens in a world where people don't have access to that education? It's likely going to be the people with the money to market themselves the most are going to get in front of their eyeballs. PragerU spends a lot in advertising, mind you. Like, an absolutely inordinate amount in advertising. By spending that money in advertising, the likelihood that a PragerU video is going to make it in front of your eyeballs at some point increases. As opposed to most people who generally work in education who don't make a whole lot of money. A Koch brother-funded tycoon is going to be able to get their propaganda in front of your face as, quote, education more often than anyone else. If that is your primary method of educating yourself, then it almost becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy that you're going to create the type of world that PragerU wants. A group of more selfish, self-reliant people who are going to read into their bullshit, or feed. They will be fed with their bullshit. They're not going to read into it. Okay, now, healthcare. Well, actually, there's another angle we need to talk about with education. Sorry. There's the angle of what type of world does PragerU want? One where Dennis Prager can enrich himself more. And a world with less education is one where Dennis Prager can enrich himself more. Another angle to look at this through is what really happens when you have less educated people. Divorce Dennis Prager from the situation. When people are less educated, they tend to be, go ahead and say it, easier to manipulate. In many cases, more religious. There's nothing wrong with being religious, but there is certainly an incredibly high amount of religiosity in the undereducated. It is a lot easier to convince people of bullshit. Why does that increased amount of religiosity matter? While it is likely that you may find yourself just going to a bloat with a bunch of friendly pagans, which wouldn't necessarily be an issue, it is also likely that you're going to find yourself falling into a community like Steven Anderson's, or falling in line with Kent Hovind, or any of these people. I don't want that society. I want people to be better educated, where they're not reliant on their religious pastors for their day-to-day information, because that just happens to be the info that's free. But that is a world that Dennis Prager seems to want. We can look at it as a world that includes PragerU or a world that does not include PragerU, and both of them suck if people don't have access to education. By the way, I know that they say people feel entitled to. People should feel entitled to education. Knowledge that has been accumulated over time by our ancestors should be free for everyone. Everyone should have access to knowledge. There's nothing wrong with everybody having access to knowledge and having access to people who are able to teach you that information in a way that is digestible. Now let's talk about healthcare, because this ties into a few other things on this. They say in a welfare state, people feel entitled to healthcare. Well, you know what? I pay taxes. I think that money should go to healthcare. Not just for me, but for other people. The question you have to ask Dennis Prager is, do you want to live in a world where somebody who is disabled and cannot work cannot afford healthcare for themselves? What do you do in this scenario? Do you just cull the weak? Do you just say, screw you, I've got mine? And while someone like Dennis Prager may look at this and feel flabbergasted and try to do everything they can to say, no, that's not what I'm meaning. That is, unfortunately, the brutal end result of that kind of rhetoric, of that kind of thinking. Also, thank you very much, OwlGhost82, for the follow. So if you are a Dennis Prager and you believe that people should only be self-reliant and that nobody should have access to healthcare unless they are paying an amount of money for it, we have to ask a few questions now. Who gets to determine the price of that healthcare? Because it's not the doctors who actually do the work. It's not the nurses. And it's not the cleaning staff. Who actually gets to set the prices? Well, here in America, the prices for care are generally set by CEOs. They're set by people who don't actually do the work. They're set by people whose incentive is profit. Their incentive is not saving lives. Their incentive is using saving lives as a good, as a commodity to enrich themselves. These are the people that get to set the prices for it. If people are not entitled to healthcare, the only option is to go to these healthcare moguls. Which leads into the next issue. People feel entitled to a retirement. So, let's talk about a world where nobody can get education for free. Nobody can get healthcare for free. Generally speaking, these people are going to be stuck doing low-risk, low-wage jobs because they can't have healthcare to accommodate for the risk, and they don't have the education to do anything better. These people are likely going to be living paycheck to paycheck their entire lives, so what are they going to do for retirement? Nothing. They're just going to die. They'll be homeless. Now, imagine being PragerU and thinking that homelessness is a problem that needs to be solved, and then creating a system that inevitably leads to more homelessness. Cutting people off from retirement is not a good idea nor a good look. Now let's talk about vacation. This ties into the healthcare as well. I want you to imagine a world, and by imagine a world, I mean you probably live in it, especially if you're in the States. Oh, mind you, let's talk about the retirement thing again before I get into vacation. Sorry. I'm shooting off into the breeze, and I need to dial back. If I work, and I give my blood, sweat, and tears to work multiple jobs to give back to my community in some way, and I do that for 50 years of my life, what's wrong with that community taking care of me in the next 10? If I'm working my entire life, what's wrong with the billionaire who I've worked for all of that time, paying me a few crumbs to live off of before I gasp my last breath? Doesn't take that much out of their pockets. But Dennis wants to create a world where nobody gets a retirement. Now, I get that he's an old fart who's got $2, $3, $4 million to his name, so he can sit back and he can just choke, and it's fine. Nothing bad's gonna happen to him. Not everybody has that luxury. Now let's talk about vacation, because this actually ties into the healthcare part.
I want you to consider a world where you're working a full-time job and you're doing it for 10 years and you are never allowed a vacation. And every time you approach your boss, they say, what, you think you're entitled to a vacation? Nah, we'll give you a vacation when you deserve it. But the only person who gets to choose when you deserve it is your boss. And coincidentally, they can just keep pushing back whether or not you deserve this vacation almost ad infinitum. It's absurd that they'd be able to, but that's a thing they could do. Your boss effectively can choose when you are deserving of a vacation. Now, without that vacation, let's talk about what your mental health does. Oh, by the way, in the world where people are having to work these minimum wage jobs, a vacation may not be enough, even if they are entitled to it, because if they're having to work 2 jobs, which I've had to do before, getting a single vacation doesn't do shit when you're still expected to come into work at the other job. And also, having paid vacation from one job, if the one job isn't making you enough money, then you may just be using that paid vacation so that you have a little bit of resting time working only the one job for a week. It's an absurd position to be in, but it's a position that people find themselves in all the time. So we talk about vacation. Consider giving 10 years of your life to a business, and then that business saying, nah, you're not allowed a time off. You're not allowed any time off. Meanwhile, the person at the top of that business has been making money hand over foot. They can go golfing, they can go eat expensive meals, they can go to whatever place they want to go to, get whatever food they want, do whatever they want with their time. They're largely free to do that because they're making shit tons of money off of your labor. But you, at the bottom, as one of the essential pieces of the machine trying to make it go, nah. You're not entitled to vacation. So whether or not you get vacation comes down to whether or not your boss is feeling nice that day. That's not fair. That's not fair at all. And what happens when you can't take those vacations and you have kids? And you're spending so much time working, you can't actually spend any time enriching the lives of the offspring that are going to be taking the helm for the next generation of the world. Well, guess you're just screwed. Let me talk about paid leave, and largely most of the arguments that I made where vacation is concerned factor in here as well. But there's a specific kind of paid leave that is generally talked about, and that is directly after having a child. Paid leave so that you can have maternal care. So that you can take maternal leave. You can't just, not healthily anyway, pop out a baby and then immediately come back to work in a handful of days. Now, remember, they pointed out that healthcare is not something you should feel entitled to either, so you're going to pay a fuck ton of money into the healthcare system when you have your child, and then you're not going to be able to get paid leave to take care of your child, so you have to take that time off manually without getting paid, so you sink further and further in debt, and now you're stuck working for whatever CEO businessman you're stuck with for the next 20, 30 years, desperately trying to work off your debt, so you don't get to make any money, so you can't go and have a good retirement. And oh dear, it's almost like all of these things feed into each other. All of these things just feed into poverty. What does PragerU really want at this point before we even get to the benefits part? At the end of the day, PragerU is arguing that the world should be in poverty, and money should pool further and further into the hands of fewer and fewer people, as has happened during this pandemic. And remember when I pointed out that the job could just withhold your vacation if they wanted to? They don't have to pay your pension or anything. These are all things that would be considered benefits of working at any particular job. And if you say, well, PragerU's not arguing that a job shouldn't give you those things, well, the last thing they're arguing for is that you shouldn't feel entitled to benefits. You shouldn't feel entitled to benefits at a job. You know, a job that you're pouring your blood, sweat, and tears into. Here's what I'm going to say. If you're a worker, do me a giant favor. If you can afford to, mind you, if you can afford to, If your job is not willing to pay you what you're worth, figure out what everybody else around you is making and argue that you all should be paid for your worth, not what the business arbitrarily thinks they can get away with paying you. I have been paid some very lackluster wages in my life. And I never discussed with my fellow peers what I was receiving in comparison to them. Because we're encouraged not to talk about that. But then, when we're encouraged not to talk about our pay with our peers, we end up having things like different benefits. We end up having things like disproportional pay. I may work at a company for 3 years, but then somebody who gets hired tomorrow is making more money than me, and I don't want him to make less than me. That doesn't mean I want to bring his pay down. I want my pay to go up. I think that would be more fair. But when PragerU puts out stuff like this and argues that people feel entitled to education and healthcare and retirement, vacation, paid leave, and you point out that, well, a job can give you several of those things. There are jobs that will give you healthcare. There are jobs that will give you a retirement plan. They'll give you vacation. They'll give you paid leave. They'll even give you compensation for education. But then they cap it all off by saying you shouldn't expect benefits. So a society that can't give these things to you, despite the fact that you are paying taxes into that society, despite the fact that you are contributing to that society by being part of the mechanisms by which it runs, you still have this last part. The one ray of hope you might have had, that your job could have given these things to you. Nah, you shouldn't feel entitled to the benefits either. So you don't get those. And then, of course, they ended off with, eventually entitlements become rights. Socialism produces far more selfish society than a free market society. So what is selfish about wanting to be taken care of? Wanting to have education? That's not selfish. And by framing it as selfish, PragerU gets to basically shame people into believing them. But here's the thing. A socialistic society where workers own the means of production and we're able to pool those means together to make sure that everybody has access to food, shelter, education. That's not a selfish society. That's a society that does everything in its power to give back to its people. And if you want me to frame this in a way that it makes sense for the entitled businessman in the audience, the libertarian going, everybody should pull themselves up by the bootstraps, why not view this as an investment? Some investments don't work out, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't have put the investment in the first place. Education is an investment into a person's future and what they'll provide to you as a society going forward. Healthcare is an investment into the continued operation of an individual who can either be a worker or an educator or anything in your society at all. Retirement is a reward for them paying back on that investment. Vacation is a reward for them paying back on that investment. Paid leave is a reward for them paying back on that investment. But you've got to make that initial investment, just like with any other business practice, just like with any type of stock, just like with any type of thing that you are sinking your money into. View it as an investment. But because it's a person, uniquely, we don't abandon them merely because they didn't give you what they wanted in the investment. But there's no reason that we as a society cannot come together and recognize that we are more alike than different in that we are human and all have the human condition and all live our own human experiences. And then maybe, just maybe, because of that, we should be spending some time trying to figure out how we can make sure that everybody has education, healthcare, a worthwhile retirement, time for vacation, time for paid leave, sick, maternal, otherwise, doesn't matter. And yes, benefits if you are working a job that has the wherewithal to do it, but we should ideally be working towards a society that does not need to have benefits from a job, because anything that it could have benefited you with should have been provided by that society in the first place, as a right by being a human being living in that society. As I said, it is a small tweet with not a lot in it, but there's so much to unpack because of it. And I wanted to talk about that with you guys. I know this is a different kind of video. This is more of my L-hack style of videos that I used to do. So please let me know what you think about them. I have been doing mostly video responses lately, whether it be to articles or videos or arguments. But something like this, something where there's basically almost a writing prompt, and then I have to go off of that for a conversation. I want to know if that's something you guys want to see more of going forward, because I might be able to put out more content if so. But with that said, let me know what you think in the comments section below. If you have any thoughts, gripes, or what have you, well, who am I to say you're not already typing those out right now? If you enjoyed the content, please hit like and subscribe if you haven't already. Please support the channel and what I do by going over to Patreon using the link in the description. If you have not already as well, please subscribe to the secondary channel, the Sunset City Podcast, where you can see me, Game Apologist, and Channel Pup talking about Sonic the Hedgehog stuff if you want something a little less political and a little more fun. But with all that said, thank you all for watching. As always, everyone, insert end of video tagline here.